Welcome back, everyone, to the special federal election series on the Northern Sentinels podcast. As I've noted previously, I'm interviewing a variety of experts to get their perspective on national defense. And today I've got entrepreneur Kevin Reed in to talk about how to invest in defense differently. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
For the listener, why don't you give us a little bit of your background that gives us a sense of your qualifications to be able to talk about investing in defense?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with I'm a failed hockey player, which in Canadian terms, that's probably like a lot of young men, young boys growing up in this country. I didn't make it to the show, but I did end up going to the University of Ottawa, where I did play hockey. And I thought I was going to go to law school to become a hockey agent. But when I was playing against U of T, one game at U of T, I had a walk down Bay Street, first time ever. And so I've been on Bay Street, and I noticed that, man, these are big towers. These are big buildings. And that resonated with me. So we played the game. On the bus ride back to the University of Ottawa, I stood up in front of most of my teammates and said, guys, by the time I'm 40, I'm going to start a bank. And so that elicited the usual catcalls from the boys. And on my journey, by the time I was 38, I started, co-founded a bank / trust company with a former Ottawa U hockey player. And so that was part of my story. I've started 8 businesses in total, and I've done a number of corporate turnarounds. I've had the privilege of serving as an honorary colonel in 31 Brigade, and I served as a diplomat for Singapore as their consul general here to Canada. So I've got deep ties in the financial community, the military, and with a touch of diplomacy, we'll say.
Let's dive into defense investment here. So, as you know, the traditional way we invest in defense, we buy things for defense in Canada, is through the federal budget. What do you see as the challenges with that model in the current day and age?
I think that most Canadians would understand this. There are three elements that our Department of National Defense needs to think through. One is the budgeting, 2 is procurement, and the 3rd is production of our capability within Canada. But staying on the budget side, our spend as it relates to our partnership within NATO is well under the 2%, and that's a bit of a problem with our NATO partners. There is a growing consensus this year that number will go to 3% plus of our requirements to remain within NATO. And so part of the challenge with the budgeting process and being allocated capital or funds from Parliament is, one, it will move year over year, so it's hard to get into a long-term planning cycle for members of national defense. And 2 is, I think, like most governments around the world, the budgets coming out of COVID and balance sheets are very stressed. And so there are other ways to approach financing, approach how we satisfy the capital needs of our national defense. There's a couple. One is through what I call institutional capital, and that would look at projects like infrastructure. They would set them up with what we call hell or high water contracts. So they're treated like a bond, but they can go directly into a project. And as we know in Canada, our infrastructure needs at our base level are pretty significant. The range is anywhere from 15 to 20 billion just to upgrade the current infrastructure. That's not new infrastructure. And so you could use institutional money like pension funds or insurance companies to fund things like soldier housing that as of today has a need of about 10,000 housing units, both on base and around base. And so institutional money with the right frame of contract could step into that immediately. In fact, we spoke to institutional capital to step into that to fund and to finance and to start the process of meeting the needs of national defense today and not waiting for the budget cycles to go through.
Now, when you say something like pension funds, people might get a little bit twitchy and go, ooh, okay, what sort of risk are we talking about here? What's the downside to this?
Well, as we know, there's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of years from politicians and from the governments to have our Canadian pension funds deploy more equity into Canadian businesses. And we're not talking about that. I'm a firm believer that these pension funds have a responsibility to the pension holders, and they should seek the best and highest returns in the appropriate risk profile. This would be on the bond side. And so you've got probably $250 billion of Canadian pension funds and insurance companies that buy AAA bonds, Canadian bonds, and other bonds around the world. And so it would be out of that group. And so if the 10-year bond is, call it 3.25%, and you could structure a contract that's like a bond with all the provisions that the government would honor, pay the principal and interest, you could issue, the insurance companies or pension funds would happily issue the capital to provide building out of military housing, for example, at a slight higher premium. So it's not the equity side where there'd be risk involved. It would be treated like a bond. And so you've got a lot of capital in Canada that would be prepared to step into that immediately.
Now, on the benefit side, Kevin, deploying institutional money in that way, not just the benefits that you see in terms of defense investment, but what's the wider benefit you see to the Canadian economy? Because I think everybody is very fixated on that at the moment as we march towards Election Day.
Sure. So the immediate benefits in things like military housing is we have a wait list today of 5,000 Canadian Force personnel who are on the wait list to get into military housing on base. They're currently in the, I'll call it private sector housing, which we know is already strained. So this would allow for immediate deployment of capital and start the build out to fill that backlog of 10,000 units. So the benefits are lessening the strain in these communities on housing, but as important is getting money deployed and people to work. We have a serious problem in Canada called growth. I know it's a hard, convoluted statement sometimes, but if we can start growing our economy, a lot of our challenges and problems start to go away. And so this starts to deploy capital. And if you deploy capital, you'll start to get growth pickup in our economy.
Now, one of the other things that you've written about, along with retired General Rick Hillier and Bryce Shashuk, is about this idea of the DSR, whether it be the DSR or maybe some other public or private vehicles. Can you maybe explain what other options exist out there that can really help us to, for lack of a better term, supercharge our defense investment and really start to build up a level of national resilience?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. The DSR Bank was a concept put together by Rob Murray from the UK. He was a Army officer, NATO staffer. He had put this concept and blueprint out in December of 2024 through the Atlantic Council. And so the premise of this, it would be NATO and Indo-Pacific nations would come together and form a multilateral institution, just like the World Bank, but with a key focus on defense security, and defense resiliency. Some of the main premises of the bank would be funding defense innovation and improving procurement in countries. We all know that procurement's been a big challenge. Strengthening the supply chain resilience, and I can come back to that in a minute. Enhancing the energy and infrastructure security. Certainly facilitating allied cooperation, which we know in the last 60 to 90 days has been challenged within NATO. And also mitigating financial risks. So a great example is Poland bought the F-35s, didn't take the financial currency risk, and the euro went against the U.S. dollar, and so ultimately the end cost of that F-35 was way higher than what the budget had allocated for. So the DSR Bank would hit those areas. But if I bring that down to how would that work? It would start with member nations getting together, which we are working on today to get the member nations together to start negotiating a draft treaty and charter. If the bank were to set up and start in 2026, 2027, one of the areas that would be a direct impact to Canadians, the Canadian military and the whole defense industry is it would offer guarantees into the commercial banks to be able to lend into the defense category, especially if you're a prime like a Boeing or General Dynamics. You've got lots of banks that want to bank you. If you're second, third, fourth tier in the supply chain, maybe you're making a nut or a bolt or a unique piece of technology into the prime. you are really challenged in our current banking system to be bankable. And as we know, the long cycle of payment through national defense, you could buy your products, sell it to the prime, and not get paid for 180 to 150 days. And that is choking growth, that's choking innovation, and it's choking jobs. And so this would come in and offer credit guarantees. The DSR Bank would offer credit guarantees into institutions like the Bank of Montreal, that they could start to deploy capital faster because they're covered on their risk to the second and third and fourth tier in the supply chain. And that's a really, really important area for speeding up innovation. And I think we've seen what's happened in the Ukraine conflict with Russia. The innovation has come out from drones and from AI technology and from robots. Is only speeding up. So the battlefield plans are being rewritten around the world on how conflicts will look in the future. And that means innovation, and that means young startups that need access to capital. And the DSR Bank would drive that through that scenario of supplying tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 with capital driven through the commercial banks.
The last question I've asked every guest on this series is, if you happen to have 5 minutes with whoever the new prime minister happens to be, and you're talking about this issue, what is the piece of advice or the first action you would want the prime minister to have or to take?
These are in lockstep with what I'm about to say. Number one, we have to grow our economy. That is the single biggest problem that we have today. But without security, nothing else matters. So we have to grow our economy and invest at the same time into our Canadian forces. And the two ways I highlighted today, one is using institutional money in a structure like I discussed. And the other is getting behind and supporting the DSR Bank, because without security, we have threats, whether it be technology threats, AI threats, or physical threats on our northern borders. Perhaps if we don't have security, we don't have a country. And so we got to grow it, and we got to invest in it. And investing starts with the military and the security. So that would be my message if I had 5 minutes with the incoming prime minister, which is grow the economy and invest in our security, because it's paramount.
Kevin, really appreciate you being part of this Northern Sentinels podcast special series leading up to the federal election to help inform and educate listeners on various aspects of national defense.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. It's been great. Really appreciate it.